I still remember the smell of oil and gasoline on my hands that night, the way it clung to me no matter how many times I scrubbed them with the bar of soap in the sink. I was a mechanic. That smell was part of my life, part of who I was. My little girl Emily used to wrinkle her nose and laugh when she hugged me after work, saying, "Daddy, you smell like cars." And I'd laugh with her, scoop her up in my arms, and spin her around the kitchen while Laura, my wife, stood by the stove pretending to be annoyed but smiling all the same. That was my world. Small, ordinary, filled with grease and bills and laughter. I never thought it could vanish in a single night. But it did. I came home that evening and noticed something strange. Laura wasn't in the kitchen, and the house was too quiet. Emily was at a friend's sleepover, and the silence pressed heavy on me. Then I saw Laura sitting at the table, a half-empty glass of wine in her hand, eyes red as if she'd been crying. At first I thought something terrible had happened to her. I rushed to her, asked what was wrong, but she just looked at me with this cold, sharp gaze I had never seen before. She whispered, almost too calmly, "It's over, Mark. I can't do this anymore." I didn't understand. My heart pounded. As she went on, voice trembling now, saying things I couldn't even process, that I had been violent, that she couldn't take it anymore, that she had to protect herself. My mind spun. Violent? Me? I couldn't even shout at her, I was too stunned. Before I could respond, headlights cut across the living room curtains. A car door slammed. Then came the knock. No, not a knock, a pounding on the door, and in walked Detective Brian Cole, in plain clothes but with his badge gleaming like it had the right to tear my world apart. I didn't know it then, but my life ended that night. Brian's presence in my home felt wrong from the first second. He didn't look at me like a man investigating a crime. He looked at me like a man who had already decided who I was. His eyes flicked to Laura, and I swear to this day there was a glimmer there, something hidden in plain sight. He spoke low, steady, with that rehearsed tone police use. "Mark Reynolds, we've had reports of domestic violence. I need you to come with me." My knees almost gave out. "What? That's insane. Ask Laura. I've never—" But then I turned to her, and she nodded. She nodded, confirming his lie. That nod cut through me more than the handcuffs biting into my wrists. That nod told me everything without words. Laura wasn't crying because she was scared of me. She was crying because she had already chosen to betray me. The neighbors came out as they led me to the patrol car, and I could hear their whispers. I knew something was off with him. Poor Laura, she's so brave. Faces I had smiled at for years now stared at me with disgust, with pity for her, with contempt for me. My world crumbled right there on that street, with the yellow porch lights flickering above us, with the smell of wet grass in the air. Inside the car, I kept telling myself this had to be a mistake, that once things calmed down, the truth would come out. Laura would tell them it wasn't true. Brian would admit they had overreacted and I'd go home. But the way Brian smirked when he closed the door behind me, it froze my blood. It wasn't an arrest. It was an ambush. I was still clinging to hope when the sirens came alive and the car pulled away. But deep inside, something cracked. Something whispered that I was never going back home. That first night in the cell, I didn't sleep. I sat on the cold metal bench, staring at the wall, replaying every moment. Laura's glass of wine, her tears, her words, her nod. Brian's smirk, the cuffs, the neighbors' stares. I couldn't make sense of it. I kept telling myself, this is America. They'll see the truth. They'll let me go. But then I thought of the way Laura had looked at Brian when she thought I wasn't watching. Just a glance, a flicker, but enough to set fire to my gut. Something was happening between them. I didn't want to believe it, but it was the only thing that made sense. Why else would she invent something so vile? Why else would Brian come, storming into my house with his badge and his lies already rehearsed? At dawn, the clanging of metal doors jolted me back. The guard tossed me a stale sandwich and walked on, like I wasn't a man, just another body in a cage. My hands shook as I picked it up. I couldn't stop seeing Emily's face. My little girl was asleep at her friend's house, dreaming innocent dreams, while her father's world was collapsing. By the time she came home the next day, I would already be a criminal in her eyes. The weight of that crushed me more than the cell walls. The betrayal was enough to break me, but the thought of Emily growing up believing her father was a monster, that was unbearable. And as the door slammed shut again, I knew it. The fight for my freedom had just begun, and it would cost me everything. Before the handcuffs, before the cell, before Laura's betrayal tore me apart, I was just a man trying to live an honest life. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, the son of a factory worker and a school teacher. My father, Harold, used to come home with grease on his clothes and exhaustion in his eyes, but he never complained. He believed in working hard, paying your bills, and keeping your family together. My mother, Susan, taught me the value of words, of patience, of quiet strength. I thought I had inherited both of their worlds, the grit and the tenderness. At 18, I started working at Mason's Auto Repair, a little garage on the edge of town. I liked the rhythm of it, the clang of wrenches, the hiss of air compressors, the smell of rubber and oil. Cars made sense. You could take something broken, follow the right steps, and make it run again. People weren't like that. People were messy, unpredictable, filled with secrets you couldn't fix. When I met Laura at a diner one summer night, I thought she was different. She was beautiful, yes, with dark hair that fell over her shoulders and a smile that could silence a room. But more than that, she had a way of making me feel seen. Like I wasn't just another grease-stained mechanic, like I was worth more than the paycheck I brought home. We married young, maybe too young, but I loved her. I thought she loved me. I built my world around that belief, around Laura, around Emily when she was born, around the small, steady life we had in that two-bedroom house with the cracked driveway and the squeaky front door. I was happy. I didn't need more. I never saw the storm coming. Looking back now, I can see the cracks, the moments I ignored, the way Laura's smile started fading when I came home late from the shop, the way she looked at the neighbors with their bigger houses and shinier cars. She wanted more than I could give her, but instead of saying it, she let it rot inside until it turned into something else. There was one night, I remember it like it was carved into my brain. Emily was 6, coloring at the kitchen table. Laura was washing dishes, staring out the window, distant. I came up behind her, kissed her cheek, and she didn't even flinch. She just kept staring, her hands moving under the running water. I asked her what was wrong. She said, "Nothing." "I'm fine." But her voice was flat, cold. That was the moment, though I didn't know it then, that I was already losing her. I thought working harder would fix it. I took extra shifts, came home with sore hands and an aching back, thinking, if I could just make life easier, buy her nicer things, take her on trips, she'd be happy again. But every hour I worked, I lost another hour with her. And in that empty space, someone else stepped in. I didn't know his name then. I didn't know his face. But I can see it now. Detective Brian Cole, waiting in the shadows of my life, slipping into the cracks Laura and I had left unguarded. Prison gave me too much time to think about the man I used to be, about the things I missed, the things I couldn't get back. I thought about Emily's birthday parties, the candles I should have lit, the presents I should have wrapped. I thought about late nights in the garage, fixing up an old Chevy with the radio humming beside me, not knowing those ordinary hours were the happiest of my life. People say hindsight is cruel. They're right. Every detail, every choice, every ignored silence comes back like a blade. I wasn't perfect. I was stubborn. I worked too much. I didn't always notice when Laura was slipping away. But I wasn't what they said I was. I wasn't a violent man. I wasn't the monster they painted me to be. If I had known then what I know now, that the woman I trusted most was weaving lies that would cost me nearly 4 decades, maybe I would have seen the signs. Maybe I could have stopped it. But I didn't. And by the time I realized who Laura really was, by the time I saw the truth in Brian's smirk, it was already too late. The man I used to be died long before I walked into that courtroom. They say the courtroom is where truth comes to light. That's what I believed walking into that cold room with chains clinking at my wrists, the stares of strangers drilling into me. I believed that if I just told my side, if I just spoke the truth, someone would listen, someone would see me. But from the very first day I knew the truth had no seat in that room. The prosecutor, Stephen Brooks, was young, sharp, ambitious, the kind of man who measured his worth by how many convictions he could stack under his name. He walked in with confidence dripping off him, turning to the jury with a rehearsed smile, already painting me as a monster before I even opened my mouth. And then there was Laura, my wife. My Laura. She sat on the witness stand with her hair pulled back, her eyes watery, her voice trembling as she told stories that never happened. She said I hit her. She said I threw things. She said she lived in fear of me. And every word was a dagger in my chest. I wanted to scream, to shout that it was all lies, but every time I looked at the jury, I saw the disgust on their faces. They didn't see a man fighting for his life. They saw a criminal trying to talk his way out of it. And Brian Cole? He sat in the back, arms folded, face unreadable. But when Laura spoke, I saw his jaw tighten, his eyes soften in a way no detective should look at a witness. I knew it then, but no one else seemed to care. The man who should have investigated the truth was already tangled in her lies. My lawyer, Alan Foster, was a public defender with too many cases stacked on his desk. I don't blame him. He was drowning before he ever got to me. He tried, I'll give him that. He asked Laura questions, pointed out contradictions, tried to get her to stumble. But every time he pressed her, Stephen Brooks objected, and the judge, Judge Harold Whitmore, an old man with tired eyes and a voice like gravel, almost always sided with the prosecution. It wasn't a trial. It was theatre. And I was cast as the villain. When Laura cried on the stand, clutching a tissue with shaking hands, I could feel the jury's hearts harden against me. They didn't see the woman who used to laugh in the kitchen, who used to dance with me in the living room when the radio played our favorite songs. They saw a victim, and they wanted to protect her. I wanted to stand up, to beg them to look closer, to see through the performance. But when I tried to speak out of turn, the judge's gavel cracked like thunder, silencing me, reminding me I was nothing more than the accused. Every word I wanted to say turned to ash in my mouth, and then came the so-called evidence, a broken lamp from our living room, a photo of a bruise on Laura's arm, things I had never caused, things that could have been staged or twisted, but by the time they were shown to the jury, they weren't just objects. They were the nails in my coffin. I'll never forget the moment the verdict was read. The room was silent, heavy with the smell of old wood and dust, the air so still it felt like the world had stopped breathing. The foreman stood, voice steady, and said the words that shattered my life. Guilty. My legs went weak. My chest burned. I heard Laura sob softly, her head lowered. But when she glanced up, for the briefest second her eyes met Brian's across the room. That look, it was the truth no one else saw. Not the judge. Not the jury. Not the journalists scribbling notes. Just me. I turned to see Emily in the back, sitting beside Laura's sister, her small hands gripping the edge of the bench. She was only 8 years old, too young to understand what was happening, but old enough to see her father branded a criminal. Her eyes were wide, her lips trembling, and then she buried her face in her aunt's shoulder. That image has never left me. The judge's gavel struck again, sealing my fate. 38 years. That's what they gave me. 38 years for a crime I didn't commit. I felt the chains tighten around my wrists, the guards pulling me away, and I knew that I wasn't just leaving the courtroom. I was leaving my life behind. And as they dragged me out, I heard Brian's voice, low, calm, steady, whisper to Laura as they passed each other, "It's done. The first years in prison stripped me down to nothing. They took away my name and gave me a number. They took away my clothes and gave me a uniform that smelled of bleach and sweat. They took away my freedom and left me in a place where time itself seemed to rot. I remember the clang of the gates closing behind me, the echo bouncing through concrete walls like a death sentence. The smell hit me first, a mix of mildew, disinfectant, and something sour like old despair. Men's voices echoed down the corridors, curses, laughter, cries. Some sounded like animals in cages, others like ghosts drifting through endless nights. They marched me down the block, guards staring ahead, not at me, like I wasn't a person. The cell door opened with a screech, and there it was, my world. A metal bunk, a thin mattress stained yellow, a toilet bolted to the wall, and a window no wider than my hand. That was it. That was all I had left. That first night, I lay on the bunk, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of prison life, the rattling of chains, the screams, the pounding fists against steel. I thought of Emily, 8 years old, clutching her aunt's arm while her father disappeared into this hell. Did she cry for me? Did she ask why? Or had Laura already told her lies that made her ashamed to speak my name? The walls were closing in already, and I had only just begun. Violence was the language of prison. You learned quickly who ruled the tiers, who to avoid, who would test you the second you showed weakness. The guards didn't protect you. Half the time they looked the other way. It was survival of the cruelest. I remember one night in the cafeteria. A man named Derek Johnson, big, broad-shouldered, with tattoos running up his arms like dark vines, sat across from me. I had barely touched my tray. Grey meat, watery beans, bread so hard it cracked when you bit it. Derek stared at me, then finally said, "You're the new guy. You better figure it out quick or this place will eat you alive." I thought he was threatening me. But then, when another inmate shoved me from behind and tried to snatch my bread, Derek stood, his voice booming across the room, "Back off!" The man froze, muttered under his breath, and walked away. That was the first time someone in here showed me a sliver of protection. Later in the yard, Derek told me, "You don't belong here. I can see it in your eyes. But it doesn't matter. You're here now. And here you play by their rules or you don't play at all." He was right. I didn't belong there. But belonging had nothing to do with it. I was trapped in their world, forced to learn a game I never wanted to play. The nights were the worst. Alone in that cell, with only the hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional screams from down the hall, I felt the weight of time pressing against me. Days blurred together. Weeks dragged. Months felt like years. Letters came at first. Emily sent me drawings, flowers, stick figures of us holding hands, hearts colored in red crayon. I held those papers like they were gold, reading them until the edges wore thin. But then the letters grew fewer, and fewer still. Eventually they stopped. I knew Laura was behind it. She didn't want me in Emily's life. She wanted to erase me completely. One night, lying awake on that thin mattress, I heard a man in the next cell sobbing quietly. Just a broken sound in the dark. And I realized that was me. That was who I was becoming. A broken sound in a place designed to erase men. The first years broke me in ways I didn't know I could break. They hollowed me out. They stole my hope. And worst of all, they made me wonder if maybe, just maybe, the world outside had already forgotten me. It was during my 4th year inside that the first real loss hit me. Until then, I had clung to hope. Hope that the truth would come out. Hope that Emily would visit. Hope that life outside was still waiting for me. But then came the letter. A thin envelope, the kind that carried more weight than it should. I opened it with trembling hands, and inside were just a few words written in my mother's handwriting. "Your father is gone." I sat on the edge of my bunk, staring at those words, gone. My father, Harold Reynolds, the man who taught me how to hold a wrench, who showed me what hard work meant, who hugged me with hands rough from years at the factory. Gone, and I hadn't been there. I hadn't said goodbye. While he was buried under Ohio soil, I was locked behind iron bars, treated like a man unworthy of mourning. I asked the warden if I could attend the funeral. He didn't even look at me. Just said, "Inmates don't get those privileges." My fists clenched, my chest ached, but there was nothing I could do. Nothing but sit in that cell, listening to the clanging of doors and the shouting of men, while the world outside lowered my father into the ground. That was the day I realized prison didn't just steal my freedom. It stole my place in life. It stole the moments that made a man whole. And it would keep stealing year after year until there was nothing left of me to take. As the years dragged on, the silence from Emily grew louder. At first, her drawings had been my lifeline. Then came short letters, written with the uneven handwriting of a child learning her words. "I miss you, Daddy." Those letters kept me breathing. But then they stopped. No more crayons, no more words. I begged the guards to check for mail, but they shook their heads. Weeks turned to months, months to years. One day, I asked Laura during a court appeal hearing if Emily could visit me. She didn't even meet my eyes. She just said, "Emily doesn't need to see you here. It's better this way." Better for who? For her? For Brian? For the picture-perfect life they wanted to build on the ashes of mine? My daughter was growing up thinking her father was a monster, and I was powerless to change it. I used to dream of her running into my arms one day, realizing the truth, seeing me for who I really was. But as the years went on, that dream began to rot. The silence was worse than the chains. Silence from my daughter, Silence from the world. Silence that told me I was already dead to them. The second great loss came in my 10th year inside. Another letter. This one from my sister Carolyn. She told me our mother Susan had passed in her sleep. Peaceful, she wrote. Peaceful. A word I hadn't felt in a decade. I felt something inside me collapse. My mother, who read to me at night, who believed in me even when the world didn't. Gone, and just like with my father, I wasn't there. No hand to hold. No final words. Just the echo of memories bouncing inside a concrete cell. That night, I pressed my forehead against the cold bars, tears burning my eyes. I whispered her name, hoping somehow she could hear me beyond the grave, beyond the walls, beyond the injustice that had stolen me from her. It was then that Derek, my cell block ally, came to sit near me. He didn't say much, just placed a hand on my shoulder and muttered, "In here. Loss is the only thing that's guaranteed." His words cut deep. But they were true. I lay awake for hours, listening to the distant hum of the prison, realizing something I hadn't dared to admit before. I was losing everything, piece by piece, year by year, until soon there would be nothing left of the man who walked into this place. After a decade behind bars, the days stopped being days. They blurred into each other like smeared ink on damp paper. Morning, afternoon, night, and all the same. The clang of doors, the shuffle of chains, the guards' boots echoing down the hall. I stopped counting birthdays. I stopped marking years on the wall. What was the point? Time had no mercy here. It didn't move forward. It pressed down, crushing everything beneath it. I would catch myself staring into the tiny cracked mirror above the sink in my cell. At first I saw myself, the man who once worked at Mason's Auto, the husband, the father. But as the years passed, that man began to fade. My hair thinned, my jawline softened, lines etched themselves into my skin. My eyes, they no longer looked like mine. They looked tired, hollow, like they belonged to someone else, and outside. Silence, no letters, no visits, no trace of the life I once had. Laura had erased me. Emily had grown year after year into a woman who knew me only through lies. My friends from the shop, from the neighborhood, gone. Some moved away. Some simply stopped writing. The world moved on, and I was a ghost trapped in a place where ghosts never left. I started to wonder if I even existed anymore. The men around me changed too. Some faces disappeared, transferred, released, or buried in the prison yard. New faces came in, younger, harder, angrier. To them I wasn't Mark Reynolds. I was just another old-timer doing life. They'd ask me, "What you in for?" And when I told them, they just nodded, not caring if I was guilty or not. In here, everyone was guilty. Truth didn't matter. Only survival did. Derek was the only constant. He became more than a cell block ally. He was a brother. He would remind me to eat when the grief hollowed me out. He would sit in silence when words felt useless. Once, when I told him I felt like the world had forgotten me, he said, "Out there, maybe. But in here, you're still a man. Don't let them take that too." His words stuck, but holding on to my humanity felt like trying to hold water in my hands. Every day a little more slipped away. One night, lying on my bunk, I realized I couldn't picture Emily's face anymore. Not clearly. The little girl with the crayons had turned into a teenager, then a woman, and I hadn't seen it happen. My mind tried to imagine her, but the details blurred. That was when I understood the cruelest part of prison. It didn't just cage your body. It erased your memories, your identity, your very self. There were moments, brief, fleeting moments, when I almost gave up. Times when the silence pressed so heavy on me, I thought it would crush my chest. I'd sit on the edge of my bunk, staring at the razor a guard had carelessly left behind, wondering if ending it would be easier than waiting for a life that wasn't coming back. But every time something pulled me back. Sometimes it was Derek shaking his head, reminding me that giving up meant they won. Sometimes it was the faint memory of Emily's laughter, echoing from so long ago. Sometimes it was the stubborn, burning rage inside me. The knowledge that I hadn't done what they said I did. That Laura had lied. That Brian had smirked. That Brooks had played God with my life, and so I stayed. I endured. But I endured as a shadow of myself, a man half alive pacing a cage like an animal, waiting for a tomorrow that never seemed to come. 38 years they had given me. 38 years of silence, of erasure, of being forgotten. And as the second decade began to weigh on me, I realized something terrifying. I was starting to forget myself too. By the time I reached my 25th year inside, hope had become a cruel joke. It was easier not to think about freedom, not to imagine Emily's face, not to remember what sunlight on my skin felt like. I had learned to numb myself, to drift through the days like a ghost. Then one night, Derek slid into the seat across from me in the cafeteria. He was older now too, his beard grey, his eyes heavy with years. He leaned in close and whispered, "You hear about that new reporter?" I frowned. "Reporter?" He nodded, glancing around. "Some lady, Karen Mitchell, I think her name is. Digging through old cases. Says she's found stuff in evidence rooms the cops never wanted seen. She's been writing about guys who got railroaded. DNA tests, lost files, boxes left to rot in basements. She's making noise." His words pierced through the numbness like a blade. For years, nobody had said my name outside these walls. Nobody had cared. And now someone, a stranger, was looking into old evidence rooms. My heart started to pound. "What does that have to do with me?" I asked, but my voice cracked. Derek just shrugged. "Don't know, but she's looking at cases from around here. Real close to your time. That night, for the first time in years, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. Could it be? Could there still be something out there? Some scrap of truth buried in a dusty box, waiting to be found? Days passed with no news, but the seed had been planted. I started asking around quietly. Guards, inmates, even the prison librarian who sometimes slipped me old newspapers. "Karen Mitchell," I'd say, testing the name like a prayer. "You heard of her?" One afternoon, a guard tossed a folded magazine onto my bunk. "Thought you'd want to see this," he muttered. On the cover was her face, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a determined jaw. The headline read, "Hidden Evidence How Forgotten Boxes Could Free the Innocent." My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages. Inside were stories, men like me locked away for decades, only to be exonerated when some dusty file or sealed bag surfaced. Men who had walked out grey-haired but free because someone finally opened a box the system had buried. And then, in the last paragraph I saw it, a mention of a case in Dayton from the late 80s. Sealed evidence never tested. My case. My heart slammed against my ribs. I read the line over and over until the words blurred. Someone out there had found my name. Someone out there had found my box. That night I sat on my bunk gripping the magazine like it was a lifeline. Derek watched me from across the cell. "What's it say?" he asked. "It says," I whispered, my throat tight, "that they still have my evidence." They never threw it away. For a long time neither of us spoke. The prison noises went on around us. Shouts, laughter, metal doors. But inside that small space something had shifted. I wasn't just an inmate anymore. I wasn't just a ghost. For the first time in decades, I felt like a man again. A man with a chance, however small, to claw his way back to the light. I closed my eyes and pictured Emily, older now, maybe a mother herself. If I could get out, if the truth came out, would she even recognize me? Would she care? The questions burned, but underneath them was something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Fragile, trembling, but alive. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the guard called my name. I hadn't heard my name spoken with that kind of weight in years. "Reynolds." "You got a visitor." Visitors were rare. I thought maybe it was Carolyn, my sister, though she hadn't come in years. My heart pounded as I walked down that long hallway, the smell of bleach and sweat heavy in the air, my chains rattling with each step. And then I saw her. Karen Mitchell. She didn't look like the lawyers who sometimes came through, cold and detached. She looked alive. Her notebook was already open, pen in hand, her eyes sharp but kind. She extended her hand like I was a man, not a case file. "Mr. Reynolds," she said, "I think your case was buried, and I intend to dig it up." Her words hit me harder than any gavel, harder than any prison door slamming shut. For the first time in 30 years, someone believed me, truly believed me. I sat down, my voice shaking as I told her what I had told the judge, the jury, the appeals court. How Laura lied, how Brian smirked, how Brooks ignored the cracks in the story. I spilled it all like it had been waiting inside me, choking me, desperate to be heard. And she listened. She didn't look away. She didn't interrupt. She wrote every word. And when I finished, her eyes burned with determination. "I think your truth is in that evidence box," she said, "and I'm going to find it." Weeks later, I received a letter with her name on the return address. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was her neat handwriting. "I found it, Mark, your box. It was buried under 20 years of dust, mislabeled, shoved behind other cases. Inside there's a tape recording, an interview Laura gave that doesn't match her testimony in court, and a medical report about her injury that the prosecutor never introduced. Someone hid it. Someone made sure it was never seen." The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. I pressed the letter against my chest, my breath shaking. Proof. Not just my word against hers, proof. But Karen's letter didn't stop there. She warned me it wouldn't be easy. The system doesn't like admitting it's wrong. They will fight. They will try to silence this. But I won't stop. Neither should you. I sat on my bunk for hours, the paper trembling in my hands. Part of me wanted to believe, to let the hope carry me. But another part, hardened by decades of disappointment, whispered, "Don't trust it. Don't break again." And yet, deep inside, the fire I thought was dead began to flicker. Karen visited again. She came with files stacked under her arm, eyes blazing with a mix of anger and resolve. She laid them out on the table between us, photos, documents, reports. "They buried this," she said, her voice sharp. "Your wife's story changed 3 times before trial. The detective's notes were altered. And this medical report? It proves the injury didn't happen when she said it did. Someone covered this up, Mark. They didn't just fail you. They destroyed you." Hearing those words out loud nearly broke me. I had known it. I had lived it. But to hear someone else say it, someone from the outside, someone who wasn't me, it was like having the chains loosen for the first time in decades. Karen leaned in, her voice low, steady. "This isn't just about you anymore. This is about a system that let corruption decide a man's life. If we win, it's not just your freedom. It's proof they can't bury the truth forever." I stared at her, my throat tight. For so long I had been forgotten, erased, silenced. And now, for the first time, someone was willing to fight for me. When the guard called time and the chains tugged me back, I looked into Karen's eyes and whispered, "Don't let them bury me again." She didn't blink. "I won't." Karen filed the first appeal with the newly uncovered evidence, and for a brief moment I thought the walls might finally crack. I imagined the judge looking at the tape, the medical report, shaking his head in disbelief, and saying the words I had waited decades to hear. "This man is innocent." But that's not what happened. The court rejected the motion. They said the evidence was not substantial enough to overturn the conviction. Not substantial? A recording where Laura contradicted herself. A report that proved her injury didn't match her testimony. Documents that had been hidden in a box for decades. How could that not be substantial? When Karen told me, her voice was calm but her eyes burned with fury. "They don't want to open this door," she said. "Because if they admit you were wrongfully convicted, they'll have to admit how many more are out there. They'll have to admit the system failed." I sat in silence, my hands trembling. I had been here before, appeals denied, doors slammed shut. But this time was different. This time I had proof. This time I had someone fighting with me. And still, the system refused to listen. It felt like drowning again, like hope was just another cruel trick. But Karen leaned across the table, her voice steady. "We're not stopping. We'll fight again, and again, until they can't ignore it anymore." The fight dragged on for months. Karen gathered more, digging deeper into records that had been buried, speaking to people who once turned away. She tracked down an old neighbor, Mrs. Margaret Hill, who admitted she saw Laura and Brian together before the trial. She found a retired officer who confessed the evidence room was often cleaned to protect detectives. Piece by piece, the puzzle came together. And every piece painted the same picture. I had been sacrificed, thrown away so Laura and Brian could live their lie, and so Brooks could win another case for his career. But every new motion Karen filed was met with resistance. Judges citing procedural issues, prosecutors arguing finality of judgment, words that meant nothing to me except more years in this cage. At night, I'd sit in my cell with Derek, my frustration boiling. "How many times can they bury the truth?" I asked him once. He just shook his head. "As many times as it takes for men like Brooks to protect themselves. But you got something now they can't erase. You got light. Keep it burning. Then came the day Karen walked in with a look I hadn't seen before. Not defeat, not anger, but triumph. She sat down, placed a thick envelope on the table and said, "We're going federal." My heart jumped. "Federal?" She nodded. "The state won't touch it. They're too invested in keeping this buried. But at the federal level, with the new evidence, we have a shot. It'll be slow. It'll be brutal. But this is the path out." I stared at the envelope, my throat tight. I had waited nearly 4 decades, and here it was. A chance, fragile and terrifying, but real. That night in my cell, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, whispering Emily's name into the dark. If this worked, if the truth came out, would she be there? Would she want to see me? Or had I been erased from her life so completely that freedom would only mean walking into emptiness? The fear gnawed at me, but beneath it was something stronger. For the first time in years, I felt like the fight wasn't just a dream. It was happening. And this time I wasn't fighting alone. The day they told me I was going back to court, my knees almost gave out. After 38 years, the chains that had become part of me rattled louder than ever as they led me to the transport van. My hands shook. My breath came in sharp bursts. I had walked into a courtroom before, young and naive, thinking the truth would save me. That day, decades earlier, the gavel had stolen my life. Now at 67, I walked back into a federal courtroom, my body old, my hair white, my back bent. The room looked the same. Polished wood, flags hanging high, a judge in his robe staring down. But I was not the same man. I was carrying nearly 4 decades of silence, grief, and betrayal on my shoulders. Karen sat beside me, her files spread across the table, her jaw tight with determination. She whispered, "This is it, Mark, no more shadows. They're going to hear you." I nodded, but inside I was terrified. What if they didn't believe her? What if they turned me away again? What if this was my last chance and it slipped through my fingers? When the judge entered, the room fell silent. My heart pounded like it wanted to break out of my chest. I had waited 38 years for this moment. And now it had arrived. Karen rose first. Her voice was steady, her words sharp as blades. She laid it all out. The hidden recording, the medical report, the altered notes. She spoke about Laura's affair with Detective Brian Cole, about how evidence had been buried to protect reputations, about how the system had turned its back on me. The prosecutor argued back, of course. His words were cold, practiced, dripping with the same arrogance I remembered from Brooks decades earlier. Finality of judgment. The jury spoke. The past cannot be undone, but Karen didn't flinch. She slammed the tape onto the table, her voice rising. "The past can't be undone, but the truth can still be heard. You buried a man alive for 38 years because it was convenient, because it was easy, because corruption demanded it. Today you don't just decide his case. You decide if justice in this country still means something." The courtroom was silent. Even the air felt heavy. I stared at the jurors, at the judge, at anyone who would look back at me. For the first time I saw hesitation. For the first time I saw doubt in their eyes. Then came the moment I never thought I would live to see. The judge leaned forward, his voice deep and slow. "In light of the newly presented evidence, this court finds the original conviction cannot stand. The charges against Mark Reynolds are hereby vacated." The words rang in my ears, almost unreal. Vacated. 38 years of chains gone with a sentence. I gripped the edge of the table, my body trembling, tears burning my eyes. My throat closed. I couldn't even breathe, let alone speak. Karen touched my arm gently. "It's over, Mark. You're free. Free." The word didn't feel real. I had imagined it for decades, prayed for it, dreamed of it, cursed it. And now, when it was finally given to me, it felt like stepping out into a world I no longer belonged to. As the guards led me out, this time without chains, I looked back one last time at the courtroom where my life had been destroyed and then restored. I walked out not as the man I was, but as the ghost of him, an old man with freedom in his hands and emptiness in his heart. The sun hit my face in a way it hadn't in 38 years. It was too bright, almost painful, like the world itself was reminding me that I no longer belonged under its light. I blinked, shielding my eyes as the prison gates closed behind me with a final clang. No chains on my wrists, no number on my chest. Just me, Mark Reynolds, stepping into a world that had kept moving while I was frozen in time. Karen stood nearby, holding a folder under her arm, her eyes soft. "Take your time," she said. I nodded, but my legs felt weak. Every sound was strange. The rumble of cars on the highway. The ding of a cell phone. A sound I had never heard before. People walking past me with little glowing screens in their hands, speaking into them like it was the most natural thing in the world. I had dreamed of this moment 1,000 times in my cell. I thought I'd run, laugh, cry, fall to my knees in gratitude. But now that it was here, I felt nothing, just emptiness. The air smelled different. The sky looked wider. But inside I was hollow. Freedom wasn't what I remembered. Freedom was foreign. Karen drove me away from the prison. I sat in the passenger seat, my hands trembling on my lap, staring out the window as the world rushed by. Billboards taller than houses. Cars that looked like spaceships compared to the ones I used to fix at Mason's Auto. Everyone on the sidewalks moving fast. Heads down, eyes on their glowing phones. I pressed my forehead against the glass, whispering, "It's all gone." Karen glanced at me. "What is?" "My world," I said. "Everything I knew." "It's gone," she didn't argue. She didn't try to comfort me with empty words. She just drove, letting me grieve the life I'd lost. Even as the road stretched out in front of me, we stopped at a diner, one of those chrome-plated ones that hadn't changed much since the 70s. The smell of bacon and coffee hit me, and for a moment, I felt like I had stepped back into my old life. But then the waitress handed me a laminated menu filled with foods I didn't recognize. Avocado toast, smoothies, vegan options. The world had changed even here, in the little corners that once felt safe. I ordered black coffee. When it came, I wrapped my hands around the cup and held it like it was the only solid thing in my life. That night, Karen arranged for me to stay in a small motel off the highway. A room with a bed, a TV, and a shower. I stared at the bed for a long time. It was soft, clean, too wide after years of a narrow bunk. I lay down, but the silence felt wrong. No clanging doors. No voices shouting. No footsteps echoing through concrete. Just quiet. And in that quiet, the weight of freedom pressed down on me harder than the chains ever had. I was 67 years old. My parents were gone. My daughter was a stranger. My wife, the woman who had betrayed me, had lived a whole life without me. I had dreamed of this night for so long. But now that I was free, I realized something I had never admitted to myself. Freedom doesn't give back the years. Freedom doesn't heal the wounds. Freedom is just another kind of prison, if you have nothing left to walk into. As I stared at the ceiling in that motel room, I whispered to myself, "What now?" And for the first time, there was no answer. Karen was the one who reached out to Emily. I didn't even know where she lived, what her life looked like, if she was married, if she had children. To me, she was still the little girl with crayons and wide eyes, the one who used to color hearts for me before the letters stopped coming. But in reality, she was 46 now, a grown woman, a stranger. The meeting was arranged at a small coffee shop downtown. Karen sat with me beforehand, her voice calm, her eyes careful. "She agreed to see you," she said. "But you have to understand, Mark. She's lived her whole life with one version of you. She believed what her mother told her. This may not be what you're hoping for." I nodded, though my chest felt like it was splitting in two. I had rehearsed this moment in my cell for decades. The hug, the tears, the words, "I knew you didn't do it." But now, sitting there waiting for the door to open, I felt like an intruder about to walk into someone else's life, and then she walked in. Emily, my Emily, except she wasn't mine anymore. Her hair was pulled back neatly, streaked with grey, her posture straight, her expression guarded. She looked at me, hesitation in her eyes, and for a moment I saw the little girl again. But it vanished just as quickly. She sat down across from me, her hands folded tightly together. "Hello, Dad," she said softly. The word didn't sound like it belonged to me. The silence between us was suffocating. I wanted to reach across the table, to take her hands, to pour out all the words I had stored up over 38 years. But I didn't. I couldn't, because the look in her eyes wasn't love. It was distance. "I read the articles," she said finally. "About the evidence. About Karen, about the truth." Her voice trembled on the word truth. I swallowed hard. "I never wanted you to grow up thinking I was a monster," she interrupted. Her voice cracked and she blinked rapidly, her jaw tight. That's what I thought. My whole childhood I thought you were dangerous. I thought you hurt Mom. I was terrified of you. Do you know what that does to a kid? Her words sliced me open. I wanted to scream that it wasn't me, that it was Laura's lies, Brian's betrayal, Brooke's ambition. But Emily wasn't a little girl anymore. She was a woman carrying decades of scars I hadn't been there to heal. Tears filled my eyes. I'm sorry, I whispered. I'm so sorry. Emily looked away, her lips pressed tight. For a moment I thought she would leave, but she didn't leave. She stayed. Her hands trembled as she finally looked back at me. I don't know if I can ever see you the way I should have. I lost my father when I was 8 years old, and I don't know if I can get him back now. Her words were honest, sharp, painful, but they were hers. And for the first time I heard my daughter's truth. Not Laura's lies, not the silence of prison walls. Emily's truth. I nodded slowly, my heart breaking and healing at the same time. Maybe we can start small, I said, my voice shaking. Maybe we can just have coffee. Just sit here, just exist together for a little while. Emily's lips pressed into a thin line, and then slowly she gave the smallest nod. We sat in silence, sipping coffee, the weight of nearly 40 years between us. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reunion. It was something fragile, uncertain, trembling, but it was real. And as I sat across from her, I realized that freedom wasn't about walking out of a prison. Freedom was sitting here, looking into my daughter's eyes and knowing the truth had finally reached her, even if it was too late. In the weeks after my release, freedom felt like a costume I wasn't meant to wear. People looked at me on the street, but no one really saw me. I was just another old man, shuffling slowly, trying to keep pace in a world that had left me behind decades ago. Simple things terrified me. Crossing the street, with cars zooming by faster than anything I remembered. Buying groceries, with endless aisles of products I didn't recognize. A clerk asked if I wanted to pay with a chip, and I didn't even know what he meant. Technology had rewritten the rules of life, while I sat in a cell counting cracks on the wall. At night, in the small motel Karen had found for me, I'd sit on the bed staring at the television. Hundreds of channels glowing with faces I didn't know, voices too fast, colors too bright. I'd change the channel again and again, until finally I turned it off, sitting in silence, feeling like a ghost drifting through someone else's world. People talked about starting over. But how do you start over when you're 67 with nothing? No home, no family, no time left. Karen checked in on me often. She was relentless during the fight, but now that I was free, her visits were gentler, quieter. One afternoon she brought me to a park. Children laughed on swings. Couples walked hand in hand. Old men played chess under the shade of trees. See? Karen said softly. Life is still here. You can still take part in it. I nodded, but inside I felt hollow. Watching fathers push their children on swings made my chest ache. I had missed all of that. Emily's first steps, her first dance, her graduation. The milestones of her life had passed without me, and now all I could do was watch strangers live the life I once dreamed of. When Karen left me at the park bench, I sat there for hours. The smell of cut grass, the sound of leaves rustling in the breeze, the laughter of children, all of it felt like echoes of a life I could never reclaim. Emily and I met again a few times, always in public places, always with distance between us. She was polite, careful, but never warm. She told me about her work, her children, my grandchildren, though she never called them that in front of me. I listened, hungry for every detail, but I could feel the invisible wall between us. One day, as we sat across from each other, I asked, "Do they know about me? About who I am?" She hesitated before answering. "They know." "What happened?" "They know you're my father, but I haven't brought them to meet you yet." The words stung, but I understood. To them, I was a stranger. To Emily, I was a wound that never fully healed. I couldn't expect her to erase decades of fear with a few coffee cups and quiet conversations. That night, alone in my motel room, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Freedom was supposed to mean everything, but instead it felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down at all the years I had lost, knowing I could never climb back to them. I was free, but free into a world where I didn't belong. I often sit by the motel window at night, staring at the traffic lights changing colors, watching cars rush by with people inside, Fathers, mothers, children, living the lives I once dreamed of. And I ask myself, what remains of me? I am 67 years old. My body aches when I stand. My hands tremble when I lift a cup of coffee. My hair is white, my face lined with years that were never lived freely. My parents are gone. My sister Carolyn writes sometimes, but age has weakened her too. And Emily! She exists, but not in the way a daughter should. For so long, my dream was freedom. I told myself, if I can just get out, everything will be better. But freedom came too late. Freedom didn't give me back my family. Freedom didn't erase the scars. Freedom didn't give me the years I should have had with my little girl. Sometimes when I look at myself in the mirror, I don't see Mark Reynolds anymore. I see a man hollowed out by time, carrying the ghost of who he once was. Karen asked me once if I wanted to tell my story publicly. She said people needed to know how corruption had stolen decades from me, how the system had buried the truth. She wanted me to be a voice for the ones still inside, waiting for their boxes to be opened. I told her I would think about it. And I have. Many nights. Part of me wants to scream my story to the world, to make sure nobody ever forgets what was done to me. But another part of me is tired of carrying the weight, tired of living inside the story of betrayal and loss. Sometimes silence feels easier, but then I think of the men I left behind. Men like Derek, who once told me, "In here, loss is the only thing that's guaranteed." He was still in there when I walked free. He may never get his own Karen Mitchell to dig up his truth. And I wonder if maybe speaking out isn't for me, it's for them. Because if my life was stolen, maybe my voice is the only thing I still have to give. The hardest part is knowing that when I die, most of the world won't remember me. To them, I'll just be another old man who slipped away quietly. But I lived through something that should never have happened. Sometimes I walk by playgrounds and watch children laugh, and I wonder, if Emily had known the truth sooner, would we have been there together? Sometimes I watch couples in restaurants and think, if Laura hadn't lied, would we still be sitting at a table, sharing a meal, fighting about bills, laughing about something small? I'll never know. That's the cruelty of time. It steals not just years but possibilities. I don't know if Emily will ever forgive me or if she should, but I do know this. I want her to remember me not as the man who was erased, but as the man who endured. The man who carried her memory through concrete walls and iron bars, who survived betrayal, silence, and the theft of a lifetime. What remains of a life stolen? Pain, emptiness, but also a truth that cannot be buried anymore. When people ask me how it feels to be free, I struggle to answer. Freedom isn't simple. It isn't sweet. It doesn't wash away 38 years behind bars. It doesn't bring back the birthdays, the graduations, the quiet dinners, the mornings I should have spent with my daughter. Freedom came to me like an old thin blanket, covering me, but never warming me. I walk through the streets and see fathers holding their children's hands, and I wonder what Emily's hand would have felt like in mine if Laura hadn't lied. I hear couples laugh in restaurants, and I wonder what my life with Laura would have been if she hadn't chosen betrayal over love. The truth set me free, yes, but the truth came too late. There's no justice for stolen decades. There's only survival. Sometimes people call me brave. They say, "Mark, you survived what most couldn't. You carried hope through hell." But I don't feel brave. I feel tired. I feel like a man who lived two lives, one stolen behind bars, the other stumbling through freedom too late to matter. But if there is one thing I carry, it's this: the truth cannot stay buried forever. For years, my case sat in a dusty box, forgotten, hidden. They thought it would never see the light. But the truth has a way of clawing back, no matter how deep you bury it. That's what I want people to remember. Not me, not Mark Reynolds, the mechanic, the prisoner, the old man who lost his life. I want them to remember that injustice thrives in silence, and that silence must be broken. When I sit alone at night, I think of Emily. We're not close. Maybe we never will be, but she knows now. She knows her father wasn't the monster she grew up fearing. She knows the truth, and that is enough for me to leave this world with some peace. The price of truth was my life. But if my story means that another man, buried alive by lies, might one day walk free sooner than I did, then maybe it wasn't all wasted. I am free. But freedom is not happiness. Freedom is a reminder of everything I lost. This is my story, my betrayal, my prison, my survival. If you like this story, please like this video. Subscribe to the channel and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.